Hey, did you hear about the time the king came to visit? I thought it was a bit unusual at the time, but I soon got used to it. I gave it my best shot. I served mussels coated, drenched in sauce. The king remarked, "Oh, this is quite good." I wouldn't say no to one or two more. So gladly I prepared more mussels, cockles, all that kind of thing. Well, he polished them off with a smile and bulging stomach and left. After he went, I felt kind of alone, so I called up the other members of royalty and told them, "Hey, I've got more left if you want some." Of course, they all said no. Like I said, this was all a bit unusual, and I couldn't help feeling dejected. So I went on a walk. I saw the ducks upon the lake. I watched them dive into the water. I saw how they pushed their heads underneath, and I wondered just what it was that they saw down there. Of course, if you or I were to look, we probably wouldn't see all that much because it's often quite murky, quite brown, quite dark, and our eyes are just not meant for such things. I think mine would sting before not very long at all. But maybe you would do better. I always had trouble opening my eyes in the pool. Anyway, I kept on walking and I came across a man. He told me he was going to town. His bag full of beans, magic beans, he said. "I'm going to try to sell them for a cow. I don't really know if the beans are magic or what, but it's worth a go. Would you like some magic beans, perhaps?" I said, No, I don't really need them, and what's more, I wouldn't have a cow to trade you with. He looked disappointed but understood, and he asked if I might want to go with him. I said yes. He began to tell me about his life, his little life, his house on the outskirts of town, the hovel, he called it. He lived there with his mother and his brother and his wife. They had a nice thing going, he said, but they had always wished for a cow, not for milk or for meat, mind you, but rather as a companion of sorts. I know they don't say all that much, he said, but I always found their presence to be comforting, he continued. Well, I didn't quite know what he meant, but even so, I thought it wasn't a terrible idea, and he continued on about his life. He said the family had fallen on tough times lately, but there was a kind of resolute spirit that they embodied, and that he knew that they would always pull through. Well, his face was beginning to turn red. I sensed maybe he was a bit embarrassed, but he spoke of things that really didn't merit that embarrassment, and I told him that, and we continued on to town. On our way, we passed a well. I stopped at the well and threw a penny into it. I made a wish, but if I told you what I wished for, well, then it wouldn't come true now, would it? Suffice it to say that I hoped that this man would sell his beans. Well, we carried on, and on our way we met a man who told us his name was Jack. And wouldn't you know, he had a cow with him. He was looking for a big cash sum for this, but our man had his beans and told him a bit of a yarn about them, about their provenance, about their powers, just how enormous a beanstalk would grow if he would just have faith. Well, this young Jack seemed like an impressionable sort, so he bought the beans without much hesitation, and the man was quite relieved at this because that was pretty much all he had on that day. Well, we said our goodbyes, and I said goodbye to Jack as well. And after that, I went back to look at the ducks. Oh my word. It's very difficult to breathe doing that somehow. Maybe it's just me. Okay. Well, that was quite difficult. Maybe I should try it. Maybe I should, okay, I'm just going to breathe for a second. And then I'm going to try slightly faster. But it might get less coherent as we go on, or I might just fail. But yeah, who knows? Let's see what tempo is this. Yeah, okay. If there's something that you need to do, well, the first thing to do is to do it. I don't know about you, but there's a lot of people out there who just can't do what they need to do. Well, it's something I've been thinking about a lot, which is probably why I bring it up now. Well, I met someone once who had this very same problem. They just couldn't get what they needed to do done. And they said to me, do you have anything to say about that? I said no, but I know someone who does. And we went on our way. There's... Okay, I failed. Oh no. Damn, this is really hard. I don't know why I'm like, there's like a, yeah, I have a tendency like in a like, I don't know. Yeah, like that's the stories seem to be heading down the same path. Okay, me try again in a moment. The river began as rain. The rain fell high upon the mountain, and it gathered itself up into a small stream. Elsewhere, the rain fell on that very same mountain, and the rain gathered itself up into yet another stream. They formed the source of a mighty river, the mighty one that you've seen flowing through your towns, through the country, that filled with water, that blue, that deep blue, that murky brown, that horrible yellow, that blue, that I don't really. Okay, no, I was doing well. Okay, hurry up. We're going back to the river, okay? Where was I? So it's like, I don't really know if you've ever looked at the same droplet twice, but they flow without end through that river, down that mountain. They cross forest, cross hill, cross road, cross desert. Everything you can think of, the river is mightier yet. It rages on. It cannot really be stopped. It can only be diverted, and sometimes it is, but wow, if it's not difficult to accomplish. Well, the water flowed down. It formed a brook. It babbled, as they say, though I never was able to hear the babbling, and it went down further. It formed a waterfall. It cascaded down. It fell. It plummeted. It made a mighty crash as it landed. It was a sight to see, quite awe-inspiring. It was a wonder for the eyes, and having fallen, it just carried on. The droplets above carried on falling. The river was a continuous flow, a force that could not be stopped. It seems odd, perhaps, that such a quantity of water could be constantly moving when there isn't that much rain. Surely, is there a river's worth of rain that falls in the mountains constantly? Well, no, there couldn't be. You know, I think it's kind of a mystery how rivers work. Still, they flow on. They flow on into the places where we dwell. We use them for the basis of basically most cities, quite a lot of towns. It's really a fundamental principle of building a town that you need a source of water. It's only recently that anywhere has been built that didn't have access to some kind of fresh water, but we still have to deal with the fact of the river's existence, and crossing the river is a large feat in both a physical and a metaphorical sense. Indeed, we have many idioms concerning crossing bridges, building bridges, burning bridges. Yes, we wonder about how we will get across the river. Well, the bridge is the most obvious way, perhaps the one that springs to mind. How else might it be accomplished? Well, you could build a boat, or if you are feeling more basic, you could build a raft. Well, at a certain point, a raft is just a small bridge. If you make your raft big enough, then you basically just have a bridge. Well, the first thing that I bet bridges were made from was wood. It's quite straightforward to think about how one might make a bridge out of wood. You suppose that you have a very small stretch of water that's not particularly deep, perhaps. You could simply get a tree and chop the whole thing down and lay it across the water. The body of water is then completely crossable. Sometimes this even seems to happen in nature, so perhaps nature itself is the first bridge builder. And I wonder, saying that, whether that might also have some metaphorical connotation to it, but I haven't thought it that far through. Well, if you see a tree that's fallen and spans a body of water, the temptation to cross it is pretty much irresistible, and I, for one, have certainly done so. I suppose that at some point, some bridge builder thought, what if we had a tree like that one that I saw, and we pushed it across the river so we could cross any time? Well, since then, the design probably got refined bit by bit. Maybe the tree turned into just a big plank. Maybe they put sides on it. Maybe they had a more sophisticated way of keeping the bridge up. It's a well-known principle that you should have a strong foundation for your bridge. You should have fixed points that keep everything in place. The tree over the stream doesn't quite fit this bill. The tree is held in place by the force of gravity and its sheer weight, but we can do better than that. If you bury your poles into the ground to such a depth, the earth itself will keep your bridge up, will make it traversable come what may, but you have to think about the middle of the bridge. The middle is the hardest bit, in my opinion, because it's kind of just floating there. It just hovers. It's not really clear sometimes how it stays up. I mean, have you ever looked at a bridge? It's this enormous heavy thing that just floats above everything else in the air. These things can span for miles and miles and miles and miles, and yet they stay up. You can run these heavy, massive objects on top of them constantly, all day, every single day, and yet the bridge does not wobble. Well, how can it be that two poles and just some cables keep that thing up? I have always wondered this, and I understand in principle sort of how that works, but I still kind of don't really believe it. It's as if there is some kind of black magic at work, and underneath it all there runs the river, the constant flow that seems to stem from some impossible source and that never stops either. These two strange forces that kind of intersect for a moment as you go along its journey. Well, I'll never understand it. That's for sure.